Hey there, and welcome to the Ace Talks Language podcast. I'm glad you're here to embark on this journey with me. This is my first podcasting episode, so we'll see how this goes. Today is an introductory episode. So in this episode, I want to let you know who I am, why I'm starting this podcast, and what you can expect to find in the podcast episodes which are to come. First of all, this podcast, generally speaking, is going to be a language learning and linguistics podcast. So I suppose those are the kind of topics which we're going to be broaching in this podcast. But before I get into that in detail, I think it's probably a good idea to let you know who I am. Who is this guy talking to you over the internet? So I'm Ace, and I'm a language enthusiast. I study languages. I enjoy speaking to other people in languages, and I also like thinking about linguistics and language-related concepts generally. But by educational background, I'm an engineering student. So I actually think this is worth mentioning because I really believe that if you learn something and really learn it, like you really understand it and you engage with it in depth, it becomes a part of you in the sense that it influences how you understand the world, and it provides you with another lens through which you can view the world. So I think throughout the course of this podcast, you'll get some glimpses of the engineering student in me, maybe through the metaphors I use or the hopefully unique and interesting perspective that I might bring to some language learning related concepts. Another part of my life, which is really has been a big part of my life for about a decade, is athletics and running and cross country. So back in my heyday, here in Australia, I won a couple of national championships and set a few national records in middle distance running events and relays. But like I said, that was in my heyday. For the past couple of years, I've been injured, and that's been really challenging for me. But nevertheless, having lived a kind of elite athlete lifestyle for many years and having trained that way, that influences you in quite a profound way. So you might find that a lot of my language learning related techniques and my way of looking at language learning in many ways might link back to being an athlete. So, for example, a lot of people are familiar with the concept of language plateaus. When you're a beginner and you're just starting out with a language, that's often associated with rapid progress. It's almost like no matter what you do, you're going to improve a lot. But what happens to a lot of people is once they get to the intermediate stage, they plateau, meaning their rate of progress decreases or it stagnates. And actually in running, there are similar things which can happen. You can get a lot of fitness gains right at the beginning. But after you've gained a certain amount of fitness, the law of diminishing returns dictates that it's going to be harder and harder to improve. But in the running world, we have calculated and clinical ways of dealing with this problem and providing new training stimulus and ways to ensure that you're getting the most out of your body and your body is constantly being optimized to be at its athletic best. So throughout the course of this podcast, you'll probably find me injecting a lot of my knowledge and experience in running and being an athlete into language learning concepts, and maybe hopefully providing, much like with my engineering background, a unique and interesting perspective on language problems and language concepts. All of that being said, so I've got an engineering background or kind of science background, and I'm an athlete. I'm also a language learner, so that's probably the most relevant thing. I studied French for many years, and recently I've started Spanish and Chinese, and I'm an English native speaker. By this point, you can probably hear my accent. I'm an Australian. I'm from Melbourne, Australia. So my native language is English. But yeah, French is my second language, Spanish, I suppose, my third language, and I'm an absolute beginner in Chinese. But I thought it would be cool to share a little bit of my journey with French with you, because a lot of almost all of my second language acquisition experience comes through my acquisition of French, because that's the one I've been learning for the longest, and essentially most of my language learning techniques have been born out of my experience with French. They've had to be modified because you can't employ the exact same toolkit and expect it to be effective with completely different languages. But nevertheless, the kind of foundations were laid during my study of French. So, what's my journey with French? I started learning French in primary school, actually. I started primary school when I was 4, but I didn't start French straight away. I was a couple of years into primary school when I started French. That being said, though, my French sucked for a long time. I studied French all the way through primary school. I studied French in the first couple of years of high school. But then what happened was in year 9, which is about halfway through high school, I changed schools. And I arrived at my new school essentially to find out that my French was the worst in the entire year level. I went into a French class at this new school, and essentially I couldn't follow the standard curriculum that everyone was following because I was that far behind. I was put, well, actually, I should say I wasn't the worst in the year level. I was probably the equal worst. I should probably say equal least proficient, because there was one other girl who was doing this with me. But I arrived at my new school and I couldn't conjugate present tense indicative verbs, meaning I couldn't say things like I am, you are, he is. Enfin bref, I sucked. My French sucked and I couldn't say anything useful. I didn't even know the basics. And that's quite shocking. I mean, I'd studied French for years at school and I had learned essentially nothing. But then what happened was I had a really good French teacher. I became interested in learning French. I started doing things outside of class, and I started catching up to the other students. And then for my final 2 years of high school, I did a program called the International Baccalaureate, or the IB, and I took French B standard level. So essentially I studied French in my last couple of years of high school, and my graduating diploma, I did French. But in year 10, which is the third final year of high school, it's the year before starting IB, I decided that I was going to do something really audacious and set myself the goal of getting the perfect IB score. And in IB, the perfect score is a 45, and it involves getting a perfect score for every subject. And 0.05% of students who take the IB end up getting that score. So you understand what I mean when I say it was an audacious goal. But I didn't just set the goal. I started thinking, well, how can I achieve this goal? What do I have to do? I've got 2 years and I'm going to set out on this mission. And I realized that out of all of the subjects which I wanted to do, French was probably the subject which was going to let me down. Meaning French was the weakest subject of the lot, because I was doing maths, physics, chemistry, psychology, English literature, those kind of subjects. And French, out of all those subjects, was the one I was thinking, okay, here is going to be my downfall. And so I made it my mission to, in year 11, learn the language. I said, well, I don't need to worry about the French course per se. How hard can a language course be if you actually are fluent in the language? So I went and did my research, and I thought about, okay, how am I going to approach this? And to make a long story short, what happened was I got a ton of comprehensible input. What I would do is I'd wake up in the morning before school, maybe 6 or 6:30, somewhere around then, and I would be going through my morning routine, getting ready for school, and I'd be listening to French. I'd be listening to French podcasts, French audio, French YouTubers, that kind of thing. and I'd be foam rolling in the morning because that was for my athletics. And while I was doing that, I was listening to French audio. And then I had a 1 hour commute to school via bus. So what I'd do is I'd sit or stand on the bus with my headphones in, and I'd be listening to French podcasts on the way to school. Then at school, I'd attend my French class. And then on the way home from school, or on my way home from training after school, I'd also be listening to French. So I was listening to so much French during year 11, my second last year of high school. Sometimes I'd be getting upwards of 3 hours of listening a day just by doing that. It was insane. And all of this culminated in, by the end of IB, I ended up getting a perfect score in French and a perfect score in IB. So it was a success story, and that's something I'm really proud of and something I'm really happy about. But I want to put it in context. I went from arriving at my high school being the worst French student in the school to then duxing the subject and duxing in the whole academic program, which essentially means I got the highest result. And actually, the French score, I don't want to go on about this for too long, actually. So I'll just mention this one last thing because I think it's kind of funny. The French program ran over 2 years, and that means, and the final score was out of 100, and then that score out of 100 was converted to 7. But basically, at the end of the program, after 2 years of assessments, I had a 99 out of 100 final score for French. And I still remember the mark which I dropped. I still remember the exam. It was a reading comprehension exam, and there was one multi-choice question which I made the fatal mistake which you should never make in an exam. I thought about, with the extra time I had, I spent it all thinking about this one multiple choice question I was a little bit confused about, and at the last minute I changed my answer. So that haunts me to this day. Yeah, but anyway, I've studied languages, and I've got a fair bit of experience studying languages, and I really enjoy it. And so that's what this podcast is about. I do a lot of thinking about languages. I study languages a lot, and I also like thinking about language itself in its structure, and that kind of is more the linguistics side of language. So I spend a lot of time thinking about those things and doing those things, and I want to share it with people because I've got a passion for this subject, and I want to have discussions with people about it. Also, part of language is essentially taking your thoughts and emotions and verbalizing them. That is taking what you're feeling and thinking and putting it into words. And I think that's a really valuable skill, and I think this podcast will force me to do that. So I think that's going to be really useful. It'll be a useful project. Also, it's an excuse to meet other interesting people. And I really mean that. I'm hoping on this show that I'll be able to have guests on the show where we chat about things like their own language learning experience and their linguistic background, where they grew up, and their cultural background. But also, I have a dream. I have a dream for this podcast that one day we'll be able to get academic linguists on, and we'll talk about really complicated linguistics concepts in an accessible way for people. So I have a big dream for this podcast. I hope it's going to grow and it's going to become something really, really fantastic. Which brings me to, what can you expect to find in the podcast? What am I going to talk about in the episodes, and what is the episode structure going to be? So I think, as of right now, at the outset, this is what I'm kind of thinking. I'm thinking some episodes will be solo episodes where it's just me talking to you guys directly, and some episodes will be episodes with guests. I imagine and anticipate that there'll be quite a few of both types of episodes, but in the solo episodes, I think what a lot of episodes will be is I'll take a language-related idea or thought, and so this is to say things I find interesting about language and think other people might find interesting about language and linguistics ideas, and I'll just try to get my teeth into it, and I'll really explore the concept and talk to you guys about it, and I'll do some research about that topic, and I'll distill all of this information that I've gathered down into something which is a compact podcast episode where you can get a taste of a really interesting linguistics field or topic or a language related idea, and just enjoy it. I mean, an example is, I think there's this really fantastic concept which I often think about, and it's, I suppose, the fallibility of language, meaning language isn't perfect. And sometimes I really wonder, is it possible that some human thoughts and emotions can't be perfectly encoded in language? Meaning, is language an imperfect medium of communication? Are there some things that we can't communicate through language? And I like to articulate it this way. This is the kind of engineer in me, I suppose. I like to think that the more competent we become as speakers of a language, the closer we approach being able to articulate our thoughts and emotions perfectly via language, but we'll never be able to actually reach it. We'll never reach that ideal where we'll actually be able to communicate to someone exactly what we're feeling and exactly what we're thinking. And sometimes in order to be able to communicate that feeling or thought, we use other means like touch and intimacy and art like music and painting. So the way a mathematician would say it, we asymptotically approach being able to say, communicate exactly what we're thinking and feeling. So there'll be things like that which you can look forward to. Also, there'll be episodes where I just talk directly to you guys about my own language learning experience right now, and the kind of how I'm going in my language study and the things which I'm learning from my own experience that I think might be useful for other people. And for my fellow language learners, I hope that'll give you someone to relate to and maybe even a little bit of motivation, because sometimes language learning can be a little bit of a, let's say, self-driven thing where you're kind of studying on your own and you encounter these challenges, and sometimes you kind of doubt yourself and you doubt whether you'll be able to achieve your goals. But I'm hoping that if you have someone like me who's telling you this is what the challenges they're facing right now, this is they're sucking over here and they didn't hit their schedule and this is really hard and this is how they overcame that problem, then maybe you'll have a partner on your own language learning journey. And also, I'll be doing a lot of reporting and reviewing. And by that, I mean, I read a lot of language content. And so what I'll do is, with all of the language related content that I'm reading, like academic articles or books and things of that nature, I'll take them all, I'll synthesize them, and I will present them to you in a way which I think it will allow you to get the most bang for your buck, meaning you'll be able to get the most value out of the shortest period of time. So that might come in the form of book overviews and reviews, or just discussions of various articles and things like that. Also, there'll be some episodes with guests. I briefly mentioned this before, but I want to have other language learners on the show where we talk about their own language learning experience in a way where maybe we can learn some things and get some tips and tricks, but also just hear other language learners' stories. I think that can be really valuable, just to realize that we're all on these journeys, and we can have companions. You know, we're not doing this on our own. When we have challenges and we really struggle, we're not the only ones who have to face these things. And I think that could be really beneficial. But then also, when talking about their language learning story, I also hope that we'll be able to kind of talk about the culture in which they live and the linguistic background they grew up in, because I think that'll be really fascinating. You know, I want to talk to people from all around the world. And also, like I mentioned, you know, one day I have a dream that we'll have linguists on the show where we can talk about academic things in a popular, accessible way. That's all I want to say for this introductory episode. I mean, it's already quite long. I didn't anticipate it being this long, but I suppose that's how long it takes to kind of get through what I wanted to chat about. I do want to end by saying I'm new to podcasting. I'm totally new to this world, so I'll become a better podcast host and producer as we go. And I hope I think the expression is I hope you'll bear with me as I get better at doing this. So yeah, that's all I want to say for today. And I hope that you are as excited as I am about this adventure that we're going to embark on. And I'll see you in the next episode.